So I've been watching a lot of videos since I haven't anything to do, a lot of economics videos, and I've been sort of, I guess, videos all about money, since the fabulous quarantine has left me without as much to do as I would like. And I came across this one. This is this guy's name is his channel is called Meet Kevin. And it's a pretty good channel. I like him. He's incredibly enthusiastic. Aside from the fact that his studio looks like it was decorated by Teletubbies. It's he does a good channel. I mean, he does kind of this. I don't know how you describe it. It's very like high energy, entertainment-y type of business news, I guess. Anyway, he did this video the other day about of the likelihood of new stimulus checks, and he basically made some predictions about what the outcome would be from some things that Trump said. Here, let me play that for you.
Basically, the way I see this ending is Republicans agreeing to additional stimulus checks. Once they win on things like liability protections and possibly some other things like paycheck protections and infrastructure, now everybody can go back to their district and go, look, I'm a winner, I got you checks. Look, I got you infrastructure. Look, I got you liability protection.
I don't really necessarily disagree in the short term about what he's saying about, I think, yeah, there's going to be a lot of political maneuvering, but what I do disagree with is I think that the old days are gone. And what I mean by that is the entire paradigm of how the economy works has changed. And there's not a lot of either Republicans or Democrats that either realize that or have accepted that. And the reason I'm saying that is because, okay, so in 2009, the average American company, this is shortly after the 2008 financial crisis, the average American company owed $2 of debt for every dollar it earned. And today, that's 3 to 1. And for some companies, it's ridiculous. Like for Boeing, it's $37 of debt for every dollar earned. Basically, these companies are just absolutely strapped with debt, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that in 1984 they allowed companies to start buying back their own stock, which has been a disaster. 2000, the Securities Modernization Act overturning the laws from the Great Depression, and specifically the Glass-Steagall Act. So the way I see this ending is I have a much darker scenario than my good friend Kevin here. And maybe in the short term, I think that could possibly, maybe the Republicans and Democrats or everybody's going to claim victory, but it can't really solve the problem. It's really kind of a simple problem. If you have debt that cannot be paid, then it won't be paid. Basically, that's all there is to it. That's been around forever. I mean, if you have debt that can't be paid, there's only about like 3 different things, and the American economy is strapped with debt. We have consumer debt, government debt, but the big one right now, and the big problem, is because in 2008, the financial crisis was caused by a synthetic financial asset called a CDO, a collateralized debt obligation. Right? They packaged mortgages. They insured those mortgages with credit default swaps. It was a giant freaking mess. That has been replaced by the CLO, which is the collateralized loan obligation, and it's a securitized payments from multiple mid-size and large business loans are pooled together and passed on to different classes of owners in various tranches. It's basically the CDO for corporate paper. It's basically a securitized. They securitized those payments into something that could be traded, and it was a CLO. It's been a giant mess. And basically, what Wall Street has done for the last 20 years has figured new and innovative ways to package debt. But debt is still just debt. So what's happened now with these bailouts is, first of all, the total CARES Act, the first round was $2.2 trillion, right? That's an important number to remember. Okay, so more than 4.4 trillion of that estimate is predicted on using 454 billion of CARES Act to back Federally Reserve-based corporate loans. That's 454 billion that's supposed to back federally secure based corporate loans. The Fed has the magical power to leverage or multiply money. So if the Treasury gives it money, it can multiply that by 10 times. So in the end, according to what the president has said, this will mean $4.5 trillion going to big banks and corporate entities. And that's versus 1.4 trillion for regular Americans. So the ratio is 3.5 to 1. Basically, when they put money when they give out stimulus, that CARES Act money is backing all kinds of horrifying corporate debt and stuff that the banks created that should never have been created. It cannot be fixed. It won't be fixed. I don't know if anyone's familiar with something called the Cantillon effect. This is something in economics, and it refers to the Cantillon effect refers to the change in relative prices resulting from a change in money supply. The change in relative prices occurs because the change in money supply has a specific injection point and therefore a specific flow path through the economy. So if you basically make more money and you give it to everyone, then prices go up, but everybody's got more money, so everything basically remains kind of equal. But if you create a lot more money and you give a lot of it to one person and a very small amount of that newly created money to another person, you have changed the value in the system. In other words, the banks are getting 3.5 times what the people are getting. And this can only end in one way. Debt that cannot be repaid will not be repaid. And it's going to be a constant fight, a constant flow of money going into the system. And as long as more money, I'm not actually that offended by the money going into the system. More what I'm offended by is the way it's going in. The fact that it's going in so disproportionately to banks that absolutely don't deserve it. It feels good for the American people to get more money in their in their checking account. It helps them pay their bills, and it kind of offsets some of the effects of the depression. But if you're printing 3.5 times as much and handing to the banks, that's going to cause a problem. So here's my prediction on what's going to happen. It's going to go on forever. The money will have to get larger and larger and larger. The banks will receive more and more and more money. So at the end of the day, because this is not a normal economy, and the old rules no longer apply because there is so much debt in the system that the system itself has broken down, we would probably need something like from 33. We need a debt jubilee. We need to basically start forcing banks to write down debt and forcing banks and hedge funds to go out of business. That's what's going to happen. It's my prediction long term that's what's going to happen, because what else can you do? I mean, if that doesn't happen, that all that money that's out there is it's going to buy everything. It's going to buy corporate bonds and CLOs, and it's the money that's going. It's basically the federal government is pretty much purchasing just about everything. And I love what Max Keiser said. Max Keiser is one of my big heroes. But there's only really two possible outcomes to this, and they're both relatively the same. The first possible outcome is that we end up with a neo-feudalist system, and that means we basically end up with a system where there's a very small number of people who pretty much have all the money, and we are kind of been moving in this direction for a long time. It's just going to get much more extreme. That small group of people that has all the money are also kind of the same people that the government backs up. So it would be a system like they had in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, where they had oligarchs who, through connections in the government, ended up with all the money. Originally, the Soviet Union was communist. Everybody when that money was supposed to be kind of divided up amongst the people as like shares and all the rest of this. That's why a lot of people in Russia were very, very angry when a few years later there were, 3 or 4 billionaires like Khodorkovsky from Yukos. That's why nobody cried when Putin went after him, because, um, you know, how is it that after the fall of the Soviet Union, everybody was supposed to get like shares in these new companies, but it ended up where there were like 4 or 5 billionaires that owned state oil, state media, former. So it basically went from a government appointee who ran all the oil industry in Russia to a private individual who ran the oil industry in Russia, and that was Khodorkovsky. Um, and that's one possible option. It's neo-feudalism. It's like a small section of oligarchs so connected to the government that they can basically make the laws themselves, are going to run everything. And that's you. I mean, I'm not telling anybody something they don't already see happening. I mean, um, the American people are suffering horribly, and billionaires, the stock market's going through the roof. I mean, we're printing billionaires in the middle of the depression. How is that even possible? Um, the second option would be the option where the government just owns everything. They bought it, they own it, and that would be almost like the government would own a huge section of the economy, and we would call that neo-communism. So, and Max Kaiser talks a lot about this. I mean, I never thought of it that way until he brought it up, but yeah, that makes a really good point. We have 5 or 6 bureaucrats in the government that own everything, or basically the government owns it, but they're run it, I guess. And that would be kind of a neo-communist model, or we end up with the neo-feudalist model. But we have debt that cannot be paid back. We just don't. And the only way to stop this whole system from collapsing is the debt jubilee. They got to write it down. A lot of banks, a lot of hedge funds are going to go out of business. There's going to be a lot of crying about how, you know, have you ever noticed that contracts for businesses are always sacred? In 2008, we heard about how sacred banker bonuses were. We have to make banks 100% whole, 100% whole, because we have to pay those bankers, because that's a contract, that's sacred. But pension funds don't ever seem to get the same sacred treatment. Anyway, what you're going to see with this whole thing is you're going to see some stimulus money that goes to the American people, but for every dollar of stimulus money that goes to the American people, you're going to have something like the CARES Act, which is just going to funnel money, is going to absorb all of it. Just, buying corporate debt, buying just any securities that they can get, any junk quality securities that they can get are just going to be gobbled up by the CARES Act. So at the end of the day, here's my prediction: is it keeps going, and it starts going faster and faster and faster as those checks go out. They're going to go out quicker and quicker and quicker, because we can't restart the economy with the current debt structure. We have too much debt, and this is an old problem. It's basically been around forever. It happens all societies when you have debtors and you have creditors. Eventually, because the creditors, like the banks, start to acquire all the money. I mean, if you owe money, who's going to get it? The creditors. Creditors start making the rules worse and worse and worse for the debtors, and eventually the creditors are so connected to the government, and the whole system spins out of control. It's been going on since civilization has existed. It's one of the reasons that I've said this before, and people always say I think I'm crazy when I say this, but I challenge you to find any religious writing that does not mention debt. And it always mentions the same thing. I'm going back to a solution that's been around for thousands of years, the Jubilee. At a certain point, you just have to write down all the debt, restructure your society, and move forward from there. Anyway, I wanted to respond to this video because even though I think he makes a great point, and I think in the short term, he might be completely correct, in the long term, our the old model doesn't work anymore, and we are in a new era. And we got out of this before. We got out of this in the 30s, and through the New Deal and Glass-Steagall and what FDR did, and we will get out of this again. But we should probably just look back to what we were doing before. We don't have to do anything. I want, you know what, my answer to the U.S. economy is what the U.S. economy was from 33 to 84, the New Deal economy, basically keeping a stranglehold on banks so they don't go out and do all kinds of crazy investments and get themselves in all kinds of trouble. It's the Glass-Steagall Act. It's stopping banks from buying back their own stock to inflate the borrowing to buy stock, so that executives can make more money, and the whole business is so strapped with debt that anything blows it up. Anyway, I just wanted to respond to Meet Kevin, or Kevin's video. I like Kevin. I respect the fact that he does a good show every day, and I wish him the best of luck. So